Okay, hello everyone, and welcome to this conversation in careers, part of the One Nucleus Careers Conference, building life science adventures. And the live element of the conference is taking place March 30th to 31st. Around that, we do now have a conference app which can be accessed via to delegates. And part of that is some exciting career conversations which we're having with contacts in our network. So today I'm joined by Yasmin Surani. And Yasmin, I just want to kick off the conversation today. If you could just tell me a little bit about your current role and how you got there.
Thanks, Alicia. I'm currently a PhD student shared between King's College London and Public Health England. My project's looking into a mechanism of antibiotic resistance in multi-drug resistant pathogens. So it's split that the chemistry work happens at King's and then Public Health England has all the microbiology expertise. So I applied through the BBSRC LIDO program, which specializes in interdisciplinary PhDs. And I was quite fussy when I was looking for a PhD because one thing was to get back a bit more into chemistry, which I hadn't really done since my master's degree.
Mm.
Another thing was kind of wanted an industry sponsored PhD for the employability element. I wanted a program that provided quite a bit of training alongside just the lab PhDs that would have a bit of a cohort to go with it as well.
Mm.
And I wanted it to be in London. So this, and also a very applied project I was quite keen on. So something that I could see where my project would then go. So this project ticked all the boxes, and that's what I'm
Excellent.
doing.
So that mean it's quite obviously a technical sounding course there. In terms to get to that point, so did you do bachelor's, masters, and were they in sort of related topics there?
So my undergraduate degree actually was very broad as well. I
Mm-hmm.
did a natural science degree and I did things from
Okay.
cell biology to then organic chemistry. So that sort of came together.
Mm-hmm.
And then I went to do a master's in organic chemistry and drug discovery. So again, I was sort of bridging the chemistry and biology. And in between that, so between the bachelor's and master's, I was working at Abcam, which sells life science reagents. So I got a bit of lab experience there. I was working in logistics actually, but it was getting products customer ready. And then after my master's, I went to Illumina briefly and then spent actually about 2.5, 3 years at a biotech company called Crescendo Biologics in Cambridge, and they make antibody fragments as drugs. So it was after that that I sort of was looking for a bit more research, and I was sort of wondering about there's going to be this sort of glass ceiling if you don't have a PhD and to get into more senior sort of roles, project manager roles, or having line reports and so on, whether it would be better really for the career to get myself have some more independent project experience.
Excellent. And I mean, I'll confess for the viewers that we do know each other from Abcam. We work together. So yes, I do remember the logistics aspect. You've highlighted there, a really strong background in academia and in industry. And I think what might be interesting maybe for some listeners is maybe early career seekers who might be in a similar position and might be either currently in the lab and wondering whether to continue to or to move out to a role out still within science but non-lab based. And I guess sometimes part of that is kind of thinking what the skills I've currently got and how can I use those outside of the lab. I mean, I kind of had I don't know if it's a dilemma, but a similar train of thought. So what are the kind of skills from your experience that you've had or learnt whilst in the laboratory and actually you've found have been very transferable to outside of the lab?
My roles in industry have all sort of actually been lab based, but it's a sort of a different way of working in the lab. So when you're in academia, you're often very focused on your project. And so you report maybe to your supervisor, different amounts depending on the supervisor, but you're a lot of it, you have the freedom to do your own thing. Whereas in industry, there's a lot more teamwork. You'll be working on a project, but there'll be a project manager for that who's delegating work to you and so on. So communication is really important there. Teamwork is really important. The pressure to meet deadlines and so the changing priorities, because it could be that, you know, one project's running behind, so you urgently need to move over there to help out.
Absolutely. So there is indeed a lot of kind of almost like headlining skills, if you like, you've highlighted there, like your project management, your communication, and sometimes I guess for those maybe in the lab when they're listing skills, it can be sometimes quite technical. But if you look at kind of those kind of broader transferable skills, yes, I guess that's where there's the real kind of value there as well, obviously. So another topic which I'm sort of keen to understand your experience of, and it's something which we'll be discussing during the conference, is mentorship. So I'm wondering if you would be happy to sort of talk to us about your experiences of mentorship so far. So maybe within different roles, so within an academic and an industry setting.
So I think I've never formally had someone defined as a mentor, but there have always been sort of more senior, very supportive colleagues along the way. And so it's sort of, for example, now my manager at Public Health England. He's very good at um, looking for opportunities that would interest me and trying to find ways that would sort of develop you. And that was quite similar in industry, trying to find you, because when you could be doing something that just needs to be done, there's also, you know, the opportunity for side projects, the opportunity to have a bit of responsibility, which is important for your career, the opportunity to sort of showcase something you can do and gain visibility for you at a company. And actually it was people in the company that would then suggest that I'd go and do a PhD, and that would be good for me, because in a way that's not in the company's best interest, that's in my best interest, that I would, you know, leave and do something else. But and I think another thing, so it was giving me the confidence to do that, and also along the way giving you the confidence in yourself with people, you know, because they don't have to praise you or say positive things, but having that, you know, you're perfectly good enough to do this, or this kind of thing, that was people going sort of above and beyond to make the experience better for me.
That's really interesting. You highlighted that how one of your employers kind of I don't know, push you to do encouraged you to pursue sort of a PhD. So then in that way they would be losing you, but then I guess they recognize the value of creating that opportunity for you. And then, you know, that does then go towards, I guess, you know, if more employers are doing that, it goes towards the sector as a whole, because, you know, it's kind of nurturing talent and developing it. And I totally relate to what you say in terms of opportunities that sometimes put you out of your comfort zone, but help you to grow. I think that's really important. So be encouraged to take on new tasks or to lead new projects, etc. So that makes perfect sense. So in terms of you know, we could speak generally when you're you know, thinking about career opportunities, or what do you look for in terms of an employer? Say, what would you look for? Because I guess, I mean, in the current situation, we're not quite post-pandemic, but you know, there might be some things which have changed now. Some people might be thinking more about flexibility in terms of working arrangements, but perhaps even issues such as sustainability and greenness might come in there more, because people are expecting companies to kind of scale back a bit in terms of travel. What sort of things that might capture your attention?
I think first I would look at what sort of problem or research area the company or group is addressing, whether that interests me, and then whether sort of the expertise and facilities they have to be able to do that work. And then a manager, sort of enough support and guidance, but also giving you some flexibility, so room for your own decisions, and as I sort of said before, room for your own growth. And the team where it's sort of a happy, collaborative, supportive kind of environment to be in. All those things really.
Absolutely. So yeah, I guess there's a lot of different touch points there in terms of sort of the leadership there, the team dynamic, and and you made a very important point, the research area, the interest, because I guess, I mean, at the stage you are now, you're sort of highly skilled in a particular area, research area, and so it makes sense to kind of use that specialism. So then, sort of looking back over your experiences so far, would you say there's been any career defining experiences? So have you worked abroad? Has that helped? Or like you say, a placement? Has there been anything which has kind of maybe guided you in one direction towards the other? And maybe you might have already covered that with encouragement to do a PhD, but is there any sort of other experiences you could share?
I think often it was just, so to get each job, there was maybe, so to get the job at Crescendo, for instance, in my master's I'd done, well, it was mostly synthetic chemistry, but then I was looking at photo caging small molecules for drug delivery. So it was attaching them with a group that could then be cleaved by light. So most of it was a synthetic chemistry project, but at the end I was doing some sort of characterization using HPLC analytical techniques. And so then that sort of bit, when I was looking for jobs after the master's, there weren't so many chemistry jobs around, but in Cambridge, for instance, there are a lot of antibody therapeutic kind of companies. And I hadn't really got experience with antibodies, but apart from the selling sort of more side at Abcam. But so then I had these analytical skills. So I found a job in the company which was advertising for a combined protein science and analytical person. So then, you know, sort of I had some skills that I could contribute and then some other skills I could gain. So it was often a bit like that, where you could take some components of the skills to contribute, and that would help you get the job, but then there'd still be room there for growth for you.
So yeah, and I guess that also highlights when, from an employer perspective, if they're looking for someone for a particular position, and as you say, having some of that skill set and then the room to grow into the role actually potentially is quite attractive, I guess, to an employer, because you know, that is then almost encouraging to the person they're employing, because it's opportunity to grow and to develop and to further themselves. So that again, I guess, from an employer perspective, might be something that maybe companies want to think about more, I guess, when they're hiring, because sometimes certain roles, you know, if they have very set criteria, it could be quite difficult to fill each one. And at the moment, I suppose in the sector, there's because of the way it's going in terms of convergence with more sort of technology based companies, you know, maybe the skill sets are maybe changing almost what employers might be looking for. Maybe they're looking for more of one thing or not. But in your view, do you what sort of skills do you think are vital to our sector so far? What would you say from your experiences would you see as essential skills?
It's sort of always changing, and one thing that I'm picking up at the moment is that computational skills are really what's coming through on the way forward, because when I was at school, IT lessons were still doing Excel, PowerPoint, and Word, more or less. And so I think now there's the opportunity to do actual coding. And you can see that that is because there's so much data generated these days, the ability to analyze that is really important. And then there's also the move from the coding into actually machine learning and artificial intelligence for approaching all these problems. And even as a sort of an early stage screening tool to do something computational rather than going straight into the wet lab work. So for my PhD, for instance, I'm trying to find some things that would bind, and so it's antimicrobial drugs. And instead of making lots of compounds in the lab, it's much easier to get some clues from molecular docking work. So I think some forms of computation are really the way forward.
That's very interesting. So sort of, is it the sort of in silico techniques is kind of what they're termed when you're sort of using the computational. Yeah. So yeah, we certainly One Nucleus has been sort of having a lot of those kind of theme discussions recently with stakeholders in our network. So it's exciting. And I guess there's always challenges and obstacles to kind of overcome along the way, which is kind of where the discussions are centered around. But no, that's super interesting. Thanks, Yasmin. And
the LIDO program, they're quite big on this as well, because in the first year, all of us had to do a course called Sysmic, which teaches us MATLAB, Python, and R. And at the
Okay.
time, you're sort of thinking this is taking a long time and it's not quite relevant to my project. But
Mhm.
as the time's gone on, and especially with the pandemic forcing more people to be at home, you can see more people are using these skills, and you can really see the
Interesting.
benefits for companies, really.
Yeah, and it's I remember sort of when I did my masters, there was sort of a computational molecular modeling element, and for some reason it did always stick out in my mind as something. It was one of those modules which it sort of moved beyond my expectation, I think, because we all have ideas around what science is conventionally. Test tube in the lab, pipetting, and it obviously it still is that. But I remember as because you when you're learning and at that stage, I think you're obviously very impressionable, and it's something which kind of was attention grabbing. So I do recall sort of learning about those subjects too. Where so going forward, what's next? Where would you like to see your career develop to?
So at the moment, I'm keeping an open mind, but a few things have come up. So with the pandemic and my PhD sort of being in infectious disease research anyway, I started looking into sort of the functioning of the immune system. So I read a review last year about how the SARS works and possible inhibitors for it, but looking into actually how the mechanisms at work was really interesting. So actually I'm taking a part-time course on immunology to sort of see where that might take me and see that I'd go into further research in that area after the PhD. Another option is going to a startup, so quite an early stage startup, I think, where the technology and the platform is still being developed, because that's sort of a very exciting, dynamic area of research. Because I think otherwise you can sort of end up in industry sometimes sort of turning the wheel a bit. And I think I'd like to be a bit earlier than that stage.
Okay, so again, I mean, interesting that the pandemic has obviously influenced in some way. That's interesting. And also in terms of joining industry startup, so is there anything else about a startup aside from maybe the research focus? Do you maybe see more opportunity there to grow in a role for a smaller company?
I guess maybe there's more opportunity to be involved in sort of the non-science based stuff, like finding out how you might raise investment and so on. Because another thing we were doing at part of the Lido program was a course on entrepreneurship at Birkbeck. So sort of, I don't know if I'd want to do that full time, be out of the lab doing that kind of thing, but it's interesting to have a sort of a part in it and find out what discussions are going on there.
Absolutely, yeah, that makes perfect sense. I suppose obviously for a smaller organization as well, the your exposure to those sorts of elements and those conversations, yeah, and like you say, maybe wearing multiple hats sometimes is definitely the case. But yeah, and I guess you raised a really important theme there around sort of the investment side. I know before actually I joined One Nucleus, by my and this is a testament to One Nucleus, my knowledge of those themes was far less, and that's only because I didn't have to know it. In my previous roles, it wasn't a requirement. I was working in a separate function, which, they're all very important in their own right. But I think having an overview of those topics and just understanding more about, how you make a business and how you grow a business and then sort of applying it in our sector, that's actually it's really interesting, and obviously then highlights why our sort of the region that we have here, why it's so exciting and thriving because of sort of the activity going on. But no, that was really, really interesting to hear your perspectives. Thanks, Yasmin. And I hope to see you online on the conference app, and maybe other delegates can see you and reach out too if they'd like to talk more. So with that, I'd just like to thank you for your time today, and let's keep in touch. Speak soon. Thanks, Yasmin.